This year, 2025, marks 30 years since Star Trek Voyager premiered on television. It's also been 24 years since Voyager aired its series finale. So, regardless of what you think of the show, and longtime viewers of mine will know I wasn't always its biggest fan, the fact is, it's a finished work. And because it has been that for so long, it's easy to treat the work that it is like it could never have been anything other than what it turned out to be. And I guess if you're a determinist, that's exactly what you think about Voyager and everything else. But let's assume none of us are determinists for the rest of this video, because that's more fun. Okay? Voyager is one of those shows with a core premise that seems to demand that it follow a particular course, at least in a very general way. The premise of Voyager is that the hero ship, the USS Voyager, finds itself flung suddenly to the other side of the galaxy with no quick way back to its home region of space. Since that's the setup, the payoff is obvious. The ending of the show, whatever the specifics of the scenario might be, will see the crew of Voyager return home. And that is, in fact, what happened. But what if something else had happened instead? What if the producers of Voyager, or perhaps some of the studio or network executives who held the fate of the show in their hands, had grown tired of that premise and decided to take the series in another direction? It's not just a hypothetical question I pulled out of thin air. This almost happened. That's why I'm going to spend this video exploring the question, what if the Starship Voyager actually made it home in Season 5? Because I'm old enough to have been paying attention at the time, I remember the internet discussions speculating about the producers of Voyager potentially bringing the ship home from the Delta Quadrant before the end of the series. Unlike today, when a lot of similar online chatter is driven by articles on clickbait websites jumping to wildly unjustified conclusions based on insubstantial or non-existent evidence, the talk back in the day about Voyager making an earlier than expected return to Federation space reflected discussions the producers of the show and their employers at the network and the studio were actually having. You can find evidence of this easily enough through simple searches of newspaper archives accessible via Google. Here's one from Deseret News, dated August 14th, 1998. That's a little over 2 months before the premiere of Voyager's 5th season. Headline, Will Voyager be coming home? First sentence, the crew of the USS Voyager might be coming home this season. No shit. Do go on, Deseret News, do go on. But that remains a big maybe at the moment. If the top brass at UPN has its way, Star Trek Voyager will no longer be a series about a Federation starship stranded on the other side of the galaxy. That's been the premise of the show since it debuted in January 1995. They'd like to see Captain Janeway and her crew back in the same setting as Star Trek The Next Generation, and Star Trek Deep Space Nine. It's a possibility, said UPN Entertainment President Tom Noonan. What we see is that this has been a ship lost in space for several seasons now, and we'd love to see them back in touch with the Federation. And then, a couple of paragraphs later, whether this will happen or not remains to be seen. The official comment from executive producer Rick Berman is no comment. No comment can mean a lot of things. In this context, I think the most likely meaning is the network is pushing this on us, but we really don't want to do it. That pressure from the network is obvious in this same article, if you read between the lines. It's something that Rick and co-executive producer Brannon Braga are looking very closely at, Noonan said. If they do bring the ship home, it will happen over a multiple episode arc, and we will make as much of an event of it as possible. But it's something that would be welcome. In other words, we at the network that airs the show and makes its existence possible would really love it if the producers did this thing we want them to do, and they're gonna really think about it. Obviously, it didn't happen. As we all know, Voyager remains in the Delta Quadrant until the closing moments of the series finale, but is that because the producers of the show, Berman and Braga, stuck to their guns and resisted the interference of these network executives? Or did the network executives realize it probably wasn't going to make a difference and just stop trying to interfere? Or was it some combination of the two? Probably it was some combination of the two. Whatever an opinionated doofus who wasn't actually there and has no way of knowing for sure what happened makes a YouTube video where he tells you an event occurred for one of two possible reasons, it usually turns out it was a combination of the two reasons. It's just how life works. I do know this much. It wasn't only network suits like UPN Entertainment President Tom Noonan who were talking about retooling the show and having Voyager return to Federation territory with a couple of seasons yet to go. Those aforementioned producers were talking about it too. This comes from an interview with Brannon Braga quoted in an article by Rob Owen, published in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette on November 30, 1999, so a little over 2 months into the original broadcast of Season 6. The article was printed 2 days before the airing of the episode Pathfinder, which is the one where, thanks to the efforts of Reginald Barclay back in the Alpha Quadrant, the Delta Quadrant stranded crew of the Starship Voyager are finally able to make contact with Starfleet and open a channel of communications that allows them to send and receive messages from their loved ones back home. Except for Neelix. He's not from the Alpha Quadrant, and nobody loves him. Not even Naomi Wildman. She just feels bad for him. It's not the same. Pity isn't love. The producers were clearly hoping that Pathfinder might pop a rating. Not only does it depict a milestone in the show's overarching plot, the lost ship connecting with home for the first time, it also guest stars Dwight Schultz as Barclay and Marina Sirtis as Counselor Troy. They were both on that far more popular Star Trek show from a few years before. I suspect the timing of the interview was intended to give Braga the opportunity to promote this upcoming episode, but in the article, Braga is only quoted as addressing 3 subjects: Captain Janeway's erratic characterization, which he acknowledges but tries to defend, the then-rumored Star Trek series that would follow the end of Voyager, which would turn out to be Enterprise, and sandwiched between those two, the question of whether or not the Starship Voyager would make it home, and if so, when. We're always talking about taking the ship home, Braga said. That's something that comes up almost every week. We just keep putting it off because it doesn't feel like the right time. Braga said the big question is whether Voyager and its crew will make it home in the last episode of the series or earlier in the final season, so viewers can see what happens when the crew gets back to Earth. That's the last question that seems yet to be resolved. Judging by that interview, by the time the show entered Season 6, the decision had already been made that the ship was staying in the Delta Quadrant until the end, though maybe not until the very end. That reflects talks that fans were having at the time, and also still are to this day, about how it might be nice, or might have been nice, to do the Voyager Comes Home show as, say, the second to last episode, and save the series finale for a kind of epilogue, showing the characters returning, reconnecting with friends and family, readjusting to being back home, and reckoning with their experiences over the past 7 years. It's understandable why it would have been a subject of debate among the producers and writers of the show. That's a reasonable question. Do we bring them home at the very end? Or do we bring them home with a little bit of time left so we can explore the aftermath before wrapping it up? I have no idea whether the latter of those two options would have been better or worse than the ending they ultimately went with, but that questioning and speculation is based on the idea of Voyager making it home slightly earlier in Season 7. Why might the producers or the network have wanted the ship to make it home in Season 5? As far as the network, I think the reason is obvious. It's the same reason network and studio executives have for wanting to do anything. Why would returning Voyager to Federation space on screen have resulted in more of this in the real world? Because, presumably, at least according to the thinking of folks like UPN Entertainment President Tom Noonan, it would have led to an increase in the ratings for the show. And by the time Voyager had reached Season 5, ratings were becoming a concern. Here's another article from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Headline, UPN execs don't feel Trek is past its prime. Picked up off the Wire service, written by Neil Justin and originally published in the Minneapolis-St. Paul Star-Tribune. This one is from March 1999, so near the end of Season 5. The piece, which is about the studio's determination to continue producing new works within the Star Trek franchise despite its seemingly waning popular appeal, includes this bit near the end. Voyager has lost more than half of the audience it had during its first season. Voyager had, in fact, lost half of its original audience by this point. Adding Jerry Ryan as 7 of 9 to the cast at the start of Season 4 had helped to slow the rate of decline, but the show was still shedding viewers. The highest-rated episode of Season 4 was the season premiere, Scorpion Part 2, the episode that introduces 7 of 9. It scored nearly 10.3 million viewers. It was also the first time Voyager had attracted 10 million viewers since the first episode of Season 2, and the last time the show ever would. It only hit 8 million viewers twice more during Season 4 and wouldn't reach that mark again until the series finale. Though Voyager's audience had shrunk considerably by the time the series hit the midpoint of its run, it's worth noting a few things. First, this sort of audience loss happens to almost all long-running shows. It's very rare to find a show that runs for 7 or more seasons that attracts as many viewers in its later years as it did in its early years. Second, even as its ratings continued to drop, and by the time it got into its 6th and 7th seasons, it was rare for an episode to pull in an audience of 6 million, let alone 8 or 10, Voyager remained the highest-rated show on its network, UPN. Third, even at its lowest point, Voyager was still reliably drawing a larger weekly audience than its predecessor Deep Space Nine had done during its final seasons. That's not quite an apples-to-apples comparison, since Deep Space Nine was a syndicated show and aired in a variety of time slots throughout the week, depending on how it was scheduled by the stations that carried it, whereas Voyager was a network show that aired on the same day at the same time all across the country. But even so, the fact remains, more people watched it than had been watching Deep Space Nine. Would having Voyager return to Federation space have boosted the ratings, though? The network seemed to think so, or at least some people who worked there did. Going back to that Deseret News article I quoted from earlier, here's a bit more from our good friend UPN Entertainment President Tom Noonan. Noonan added he'd love to see the crew going out on a mission of the week, and added it was a way to get them back on course. It's something that would give the show, I think, a little more hope and literally more direction, Noonan said. What did he mean by a little more hope? Was he speaking of the content of the show, more hopeful stories, a more hopeful tone? Or was he speaking of the future of the show, more hope that we'll renew it for more seasons? It's open to interpretation, but if we read it in that second sense, that bringing the ship back to Federation space in the show would give the show more hope for staying on the air, then Noonan was assuming the change-up would lift the show's viewership. Was that a reasonable assumption? Why would having the ship return to Federation space make more people want to watch the show? In that bit I just quoted, Noonan mentions how much he'd like to see a Mission of the Week format, which is what it already was. Would the show even have been all that different? Let's rewind back to Season 5 of Star Trek Voyager, which ended in the spring of 1999, and let's imagine that instead of ending the way it actually did, with the first half of the Equinox two-parter, Season 5 had ended with the Starship Voyager finding a way home to Federation space. What does Season 6 look like from there? Much of the retroactive discussion about what it would have been like had Voyager come home early that has taken place in the fandom during the 2.5 decades since the show ended has been interested in the concept of Voyager somehow getting folded into the story of the Dominion War that was the main focus of the last few seasons of Deep Space Nine. I guess that might have been possible if the producers had decided to bring the crew of Voyager home in Season 4, but remember, we're specifically speculating about bringing the crew of Voyager home at the end of Season 5, which was also Season 7 of Deep Space Nine. In this scenario, by the time Voyager makes it home, the Dominion War is over. Okay then, it's the post-war era. This is a theme frequently repeated by fans who are intrigued by the concept of bringing Voyager home early and who know about the stuff I've already told you about UPN President Tom Noonan pushing to bring Voyager back to Federation space in Season 5. These fans are loyal, longtime readers of the Deseret News, or one of the other publications that made mention of the possibility at the time, and they wish Voyager had come home early so that the show could have used its last couple of seasons to explore the post-war Alpha Quadrant. How exciting! Except a few things. If the war is over, and there's no more war to fight, and winning the war and preventing the super space Nazi empire from conquering the Federation is no longer the ultimate goal because that's already been done, what's the story? What is there for Voyager to do? Don't misunderstand, I'm sure the writers would have come up with something, but the fascination some Trekkies have with bringing Voyager home early like this is linked specifically with the Dominion War and its aftermath, and I just don't see why Voyager would be a vessel, literally and figuratively, suited to exploring that aftermath. Nor do I see why that would be an inherently interesting thing to explore. The war's over. That story is finished. And it's not Voyager's story to tell. Everything we know about the Dominion War and every character involved with it that we care about comes from Deep Space Nine. So is the wish that Voyager would have switched from eating TNG's leftovers to eating DS9's leftovers? The problem is, a lot of the fans who say, I wish we knew what happened after the Dominion War, are literally just interested in that. They don't want a story. They want a report. They view Star Trek as a series of dramatized Wikipedia articles, and they just want information about events that have taken place in this imaginary world. Hey, maybe Voyager could have spent its 6th season filling us in on the status quo post-Dominion War. Then in Season 7, they could have traveled back in time and fucked around in the Earth-Romulan War so we could see some of that too. Any other requests? Petition for it to get renewed for an 8th season and spend that in the Lost era between the TOS movies and TNG? I mean, what else is a Star Trek show for besides filling in gaps in the canon of other Star Trek shows? Here's the thing. Even if Voyager had come home early and the final 2 seasons of the show had taken place in the Alpha Quadrant instead of the Delta Quadrant, I don't think it would have become the post-Dominion War travelogue some folks in the fandom seem to have wanted it to be. I think this for 2 reasons. One, the show was being made by professional writers and producers, not dweeby little nerds living their lives surrounded by Star Trek dolls and replica ships. And they would know it was a bad idea. I don't have a ton of faith in the creative instincts of the people who made Voyager, given the show they made, but I am willing to give them that much credit. It's a small amount. 2, not only is there no obvious creative advantage to making Voyager a post-Dominion War series, there's no commercial advantage either. The Dominion War was not a ratings draw. That storyline includes some critically acclaimed episodes, true classics like In the Pale Moonlight and It's Only a Paper Moon, and a few others with titles that make no reference to the moon whatsoever, but it did not attract an especially large audience. I'll say this again. Even at its lowest point, Voyager was regularly drawing a larger number of viewers than Deep Space Nine did in its later seasons. Now, I'm not concerned with ratings, and you probably aren't concerned with ratings, but TV network executives are concerned with ratings because ratings affect revenue, which is this here. And as we've all seen very recently, there's nothing a TV network won't do to protect this here. Even leaders of major entertainment companies that own not only TV networks, but also theme parks and movie studios that gross tens of billions of dollars every year will drop to their knees and give a slobbering blowjob to a thin-skinned fascist in front of the whole world without an ounce of shame the moment they think not doing so will fuck with this here because they are loyal to no one and nothing but this here. So even if UPN Entertainment President Tom Noonan had been successful in convincing the producers of Voyager to bring the ship home early and change the setting to the same part of the galaxy in which all the other Star Trek shows had taken place? Why would he also want them to make the show about the aftermath of the Dominion War when he had a few years' worth of Deep Space Nine ratings history telling him that nobody gave a shit about the Dominion War? Tom Noonan, who was the UPN Entertainment president at the time, told us what he wanted in that Deseret News article I quoted from earlier. He wanted a Mission of the Week show. Since Voyager was already a Mission of the Week show, what he was really asking for was a Mission of the Week show with more familiar Star Trek stuff around. A show where they could run into Klingons and Romulans more often. So, we're talking about turning Voyager into a show that sounds a lot like Voyager, only with more recognizable aliens. And presumably different uniforms. That might not have been so bad. I like those uniforms. The ones with the gray shoulders and the colored turtlenecks underneath that they introduced in Star Trek First Contact and switched to on Deep Space Nine not long after. And I think the Voyager cast would have looked good in them too. Check it out. I've got a Chakotay doll that I put in one of those uniforms. Pretty sharp, right? He's back near the sacred lands of his grandfathers. He's back near the bones of his people, and he is dressed to impress. A Coochie Moya, baby. Let me just put him back on the shelf over here. There's another change that would have come along with the more familiar aliens and the new uniforms. No more central premise. For as badly as the creators bungled it over the years, Voyager did at least have a central premise that distinguished it from other Star Trek shows. They were stranded on the far side of the galaxy, facing a 70-year flight home. Sure, a bunch of us made fun of it at the time, called it Star Trek Lost in Space or Star Trek Gilligan's Island, and sure, the creators of the show never managed to realize even a fraction of the dramatic potential inherent to the premise, but at least it was something. At least in theory, the show had something that made it a little different from its predecessors in the franchise. In this hypothetical scenario, Voyager goes from Star Trek Gilligan's Island to Star Trek. Voyager was already more often than not a painfully bland and generic series. Turning it into literally just another Star Trek show would only have worsened that condition. But hey, what do I know? Maybe that would have gotten the ratings up. There is a bottomless appetite among the public for more of the same. The relative popularity of the mostly execrable Star Trek Picard testifies to that. One of the reasons Deep Space Nine wasn't more popular at the time, something Trekkies in particular who didn't care for it often said, was, it just doesn't feel like Star Trek. A few of the more recent projects in the franchise have attracted the same complaint, so maybe making Voyager the most aggressively nondescript general-purpose Star Trek show possible would have attracted more viewers. It could have happened, sure. And having Dr. Richard Kimball catch up to the one-armed man and clear his name at the end of Season 3 and centering Season 4 on his efforts to rebuild his medical practice might have resulted in the series finale of The Fugitive being watched by even more people. Jettison the premise and make an aimless show about the characters just kinda doing stuff. Why didn't they think of that? In all seriousness, the ratings probably would have increased at first if the network had aggressively promoted the Season 5 finale as the one where Voyager comes home, which it surely would have under the stalwart leadership of UPN Entertainment president Tom Noonan. That one presumably would have attracted an audience of above average size, or AAAS, as they say in showbiz. Network execs are always hunting for AAASs. And I'm sure the Season 6 premiere would also have drawn a larger rating as curious viewers tuned in to get a sense of what the show's new status quo would be like. But after that, my guess is before too long, the ratings would have been right back where they were prior to the change and would continue to decline from there. That's pretty much exactly what happened when Jerry Ryan joined the show as 7 of 9. Some new people or lapsed former fans tuned in to see what was going on, figured out it was still the same show they weren't watching before, and went back to not watching it. Of course, it's possible that moving the setting of the series to the Alpha Quadrant would have significantly improved both the quality and the popularity of the series. Possible in the sense that there is, to my knowledge, nothing in the laws of physics to prevent it. But if I were to travel back in time to 1999 and somehow get myself hired as showrunner for Star Trek Voyager, there are some things I could think of that might make the early return to Federation space worth the trip. Stories about the Voyager crew adjusting to being home, but also maybe feeling more attached than ever to their ship, which had been their home for so long. Stories about Captain Janeway facing consequences for her actions while in the Delta Quadrant after Starfleet gets a look at her logs, and then Janeway having to defend the decisions she made, and her crew standing behind her, or maybe some of them not. Stories about the former Maquis members of the crew and what future they have in Starfleet, and if they even want futures in Starfleet now that they've made it back. Maybe a story about Neelix getting into legal trouble because he didn't bother to familiarize himself with the Alpha Quadrant's age of consent statutes. There are possibilities for individual stories about characters responding to their circumstances, straining against their limits, struggling to deal with the consequences of their choices and the trauma of their experiences. Stories that have nothing to do with it being after the Dominion War. Stories that have little or nothing to do with anything or anyone from other Star Trek shows. Stories that would be about the same characters we'd been following on Voyager all along. But see, that bumps us into what the real problem always was with the show. Those stories I was just describing, stories about characters experiencing growth and change as a result of their experiences, stories about characters facing consequences for their choices, stories about characters being challenged by their circumstances and fighting to rise above them. Voyager could have been telling those kinds of stories from the beginning. Whether the series was set in the Alpha Quadrant or the Delta Quadrant was far less important than what stories its creators chose to tell and how they chose to tell them. When a show is ailing in the way Voyager was in its latter seasons, with the already middling quality dropping even lower and the audience steadily abandoning it, gimmicks and shakeups and quick fixes aren't going to help. The solution, if there is one to find, will be found in better writing, more compelling stories that can attract and capture the audience. But that is far easier said than done. It's much easier to just propose some kind of superficial shakeup, like adding or subtracting characters or changing the setting. Any network executive can do that. Speaking of UPN Entertainment president and Oscar winner Tom Noonan, he technically didn't win an Oscar personally, but he was an executive producer on Crash, the Paul Haggis one, not the Cronenberg one. In the end, even though the creators of Voyager didn't literally take his advice and fly their hero ship back to Federation space a couple of years early, in a sense, Noonan got what he asked for. Noonan wanted Voyager to have more direction, to get back on course, which for him, apparently, meant making the show more like the previous Star Trek series. Isn't that what happened? The Borg, Voyager's most notable lift from TNG, not only remained recurring antagonists, but recurred more frequently than ever. The Borg Queen herself even makes a few appearances, including in the series finale, where she's once again played by Alice Krige, who originated the role in Star Trek First Contact. There's also Reginald Barclay. Remember I talked about him popping up in the episode Pathfinder, where Voyager makes contact with Starfleet in the Alpha Quadrant. He appears in 5 episodes during seasons 6 and 7, including that one. That's the same number of episodes he appeared in during the entirety of his run as a recurring character on TNG. Deanna Troi also appears in Pathfinder, as well as 2 other episodes, one more in season 6 and one in season 7. And the 5 episodes from the latter 2 seasons in which Barclay appears, 3 of which also feature Troi, all either take place largely in the Alpha Quadrant, or at least have significant action taking place in the Alpha Quadrant. Most of the Alpha Quadrant set action in the series finale takes place in a future timeline that has been erased by the end of the episode, but I'm still counting it. Voyager doesn't actually make it home until the end of the series finale, but for the 2 seasons leading up to that, the creators found plenty of opportunities to bring a little bit of home to Voyager. Okay, technically the Borg were from the Delta Quadrant, but they were also a TNG thing that was imported to Voyager, so I'm counting them too. I'm sure all of that made Tom Noonan very happy. That's Noonan spelled N-U-N-A-N, not N-O-O-N-A-N. I'm talking about the UPN Entertainment president circa 1999, not the actor who played Frankenstein in the Monster Squad. Do you figure he enjoys sharing a name with a studio executive? Or does he think it's bogus? I'm not sorry. Bringing Voyager home a couple of seasons early as UPN Entertainment president and not the Tooth Fairy from Manhunter Tom Noonan wanted would have changed the show, but probably in only superficial ways, and probably not for the better. As evidenced by the recurring presence of the Borg and the multiple appearances of Troy and Barclay, the creators of the show were already pretty free about breaking their central premise in order to indulge in TNG nostalgia. To move the setting to the Alpha Quadrant permanently would have meant abandoning that central premise completely. And for what? To go after those ratings. Anytime you're involved in a creative endeavor and you find yourself chasing something that is external to whatever you're creating, whether it's commercial success or critical acclaim or standing ovations from nerds at conventions, you're setting yourself up to fail. All professional artists feel these outside pressures, and they're only human. They're bound to be affected by them from time to time. But as I see it, part of the job of someone who tells stories for a living is to resist those pressures as best they can and stay true to their story. Rick Berman and Brannon Braga and the other creators of Star Trek Voyager did the right thing when they declined to take Tom Noonan's suggestion. I don't know if anything would have worked to lift the popularity or the quality of the show in its final seasons. We'll never know. However, I suspect it might have helped had the creators of Voyager done the exact opposite of what Tom Noonan asked for, embraced the core premise of their series, leaned into what made their version of Star Trek different from the others, and made their ship and their heroes feel like they were as far away from familiar territory as possible. Maybe it would have had more of an impact when Voyager did come home, if so much of the series hadn't felt like they never left. I just really like him. Hey folks! Hope you enjoyed this one. I'm going to let you know what the subject of the next Trek Actually video is going to be, but before I do that, I want to give shoutouts to some of my newest Patreon patrons and channel members. First, the new patrons. They are Stephen J. Thanks, Stephen. Mitch Gresco. Thanks, Mitch. Serge Raklovsky. Thanks, Serge. Brian Gregory. Thanks, Brian. Joe Howells. Thanks, Joe. Demon Masquerade. Thanks, Demon Masquerade. The Saskatoon Fart Warrior. Thanks, the Saskatoon Fart Warrior. Fred Eater. Thanks, Fred. Matthias Bodino. Thanks, Matthias. Matt Fisher. Thanks, Matt. Terry Burgess. Thanks, Terry. Kevin Criswell. Thanks, Kevin. And now the new channel members. They are Rodrigo Clark. Thanks, Rodrigo. Ryan Nickens. Thanks, Ryan. Philip Kehoe. Thanks, Philip. Barbara Kruger. Thanks, Barbara. David C. Drake. Thanks, David. Daniel B. Thanks, Daniel. Vicky and Benji Fight Scammers. Thanks, Vicky and Benji. Benson Callahar. Thanks, Benson. John Lithium. Thanks, John. Kevin Criswell. Thanks, Kevin. If you want to support this channel, you can do so by going to patreon.com/Steve Shives or clicking the join button to become a member of this channel. All patrons and members get access to exclusive posts that allow you to vote in the polls that determine upcoming Trek Actually topics, and also submit questions ahead of time for my twice-monthly Ask Away live streams. If you pledge $5 a month or more on Patreon, or become a member at the $5 a month tier or higher, you get a shout out at the end of a Trek Actually video. If you'd rather give a one-time gift than a recurring monthly contribution, you're always more than welcome to do that by clicking the thanks button right below the video or via PayPal or Venmo. The links for those are in the video description. Many thanks. If you like what I do on YouTube, especially the Star Trek related stuff, you should also check out my side projects, the Ensign's Log, the Star Trek themed comedy podcast that I'm on alongside Jason Harding and Amanda Billings, and Trek Reluctantly, the watch-along stream Dana Cole and I do every Wednesday starting at 6 p.m. Eastern on this channel right here. As always, links in the description. Now, for next month's Regulation Trek Actually topic, and those of you who are watching these videos as I post them don't need me to tell you this, but for everyone who's watching this in the future, this video comes out in September, which means when I say next month's video, I'm talking about October. The big holiday in October is, of course, Halloween. Then in November, it's Thanksgiving for us here in the US. Then in December, it's Christmas. Well, this year, my Christmas comes early. This year, thanks to the majority of my patrons and members who voted in the last topic poll, I get my Christmas in October. And what's my present? I get to make a video I've wanted to make for years. A video on a topic that's been in the patron and member poll many times before, but has never won until now. I could have just gone ahead and made the video anyway. It's my channel. I can do whatever I want. But I waited. I waited like a child, waiting for Santa Claus to come down the chimney and leave the gift under the tree. And now Christmas morning is almost here. You, the people, some of you, have spoken. And you finally said what I've been waiting for you to say for the longest time. The topic of next month's Trek Actually video, and a topic very close to my own heart, will be why Loxana Troi is actually pretty awful. Believe me when I tell you, I cannot wait. There's a lot of poison inside me that needs to come out. That's next month. I'll be back then and a bunch of times before then, so until the next time you see me, whenever that is, thanks for watching, and take care, everybody.